everybody. My name is Herron. I'm a researcher in Teagasc Moor Park. My background is the modelling of greenhouse gas emissions from beef, dairy, sheep systems. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the carbon subindex and the introduction of that into the EBI. I'm doing that on behalf of Lauren Schlew, who did the large body work in this area. So just a bit of an overview of what we talked about, just a background into greenhouse gas modelling. Why do we do it? Greenhouse gas emission weights, the carbon subindex itself, and then future developments that are coming down the line in the near future. So just about greenhouse gas modelling. Greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, they are complex to say the least, especially in comparison with other sectors. If you look at an individual farm, there is numerous sources of greenhouse gas emissions, and even within each of those sources, there is large variations. So there's spatial effects, there's temporal effects, and there's even a management effect. All of those contribute to the quantity of emissions being generated from a given source. It's not actually feasible to go out to an individual farm and measure every single emission source over a full farming year, never mind a whole agricultural sector in a given country. So to address this, mathematical models have been developed basically to replicate a farming system and the activities that might happen. So it's not just the activities, but it's also the flow of nutrients, the flow of materials that would be coming in and out of a farming system. And they dictate then the quantity of greenhouse gas emissions being calculated. There's three main greenhouse gas emissions. We have methane, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, importance in that order. Methane coming from the digestion of feed as well as manure. You have nitrous oxide coming from manure and fertiliser, and then you have carbon dioxide, which is relatively minor in compared to the other two, and that comes from the use of fossil fuels and the likes of fertiliser and lime. Teagasc has, I suppose they've put a lot of research in this area over the last number of years. We've recently published a paper on the current average dairy system in Ireland and the future dairy system come 2030, reaching all KPIs. As I said, it's been going on for the last number of years. You can go back over 15 years when this work really started within Teagasc. And as more research comes on stream, that'll help us to improve our understanding how emissions are dictated and how they are generated within a farm, and how we can modify these models to ensure there is a replicable of the actual farming system that's happening in Ireland. So, to calculate the emissions, we use a standard, internationally standardised method, and it's called life cycle assessment. So the overall goal, calculate greenhouse gas emissions from a dairy farm. The scope is everything right up until that product leaves your farm gate. So it's not just what happens within your farm gate, so within your farm boundary. It also takes into account the emissions that's been imported into your system, whether it's through the feed you're bringing in, the energy that you're importing, so whether it's fuel or electricity, as well as other inputs. So let's say, think of fertiliser, for example. All those emissions are calculated up to the point that your product leaves your farm, whether it's the milk in the lorry or it's your surplus calves and your cull cows. We condense the emissions down into two categories. We look at animal emissions and general farm emissions. General farm emissions is just your general farm, your farm inputs. Your animal emissions is what we're focused on today. This is the emissions coming from your animals, whether it's the digestion of their feed or the manure that they're excreting. The carbon subindex takes account of both of these, but we're really focused on the animal emissions and how certain traits influence those emissions. We've previously looked at the effect of EBI. The effect of EBI on greenhouse gas emissions. We did it over the Kilworth farm over in up there beside Moor Park, and what we found is we looked at two groups of animals, high EBI and low EBI, both managed the same way. And what we found is that the high EBI had 10% lower carbon footprint than that of a national average. So basically what this is saying is the EBI is already indirectly selecting for more efficient animals in terms of carbon. And that's caused by you have more fertile animals and you also have higher kilos of milk solids as well. That's all well and good, and it's really it's beneficial in terms of the efficiency of our systems. But what's really stark and very important is that total emissions, or the emissions per hectare, which is a proxy for total, hasn't changed. And this is of concern because we're all well aware of this number that's been out in the media, the 25% reduction in national greenhouse gas emissions come 2030. We need to start going in the right direction in achieving that. So basically the objective of the carbon subindex is to address that total emissions. Overview. So that we're all well aware of the EBI, what it is, expected average profit per lactation of daughters relative to a base cow. You're identifying more profitable breeding stock. The weights of each trait in a breeding objective is called the economic value, and essentially what it is the change in profit by changing a unit in a specific trait while keeping all others constant. And that's derived using the Teagasc bioeconomical model, that's the Teagasc Moore Park Dairy Systems model, and this has been applied through the years in the agricultural sector. DBI is routinely updated where necessary, so whether it's policy change, price of product, as well as cost of production changes. Very important to note, how the EBI is calculated is that land is the limiting factor. So if you have a farm and you have your, let's say, 40 hectares, if you increase productivity, that will mean the animal needs to have more feed. That feed is imported into the system. The carbon swim index itself is actually very, very similar in principle to that of the economic value. So the carbon value, instead of profit, is looking at carbon emissions. So the change in total emissions per unit change in a given trait while holding all others constant. All traits have emission values. Some traits will increase emissions, some traits will reduce emissions, and some traits have no effect. What we do is we sum up all these traits together to get the total carbon value, and then we apply an economic value per tonne of carbon. And the price of carbon is €80, and that's what the government proposed as the carbon price come 2030. So that's the reason behind that. So the index itself, as I said, some traits increase, some traits decrease, but all traits are, if you select for them, they'll increase your profitability. So if you look at the traits around production, you look at your milk, your fat, your protein, your carcass weight, when you look at them independently and you select for them, you're going to increase your profit, you have a higher output. But because the models are driven on energy requirement, if you increase productivity, you increase in energy requirement, which means there's more animal-related emissions associated with digestion, and they also are producing more manure. So emissions go up. If we look at the other traits, so the traits that, yes, they increase profitability, but they also reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So you've survival, you've live weight, calving interval, and days to slaughter. I suppose the prime example here, just to explain how this works, is survival and live weight. Survival, your animal is around for longer, therefore you need less replacement for one given dairy cow. You've less total emissions. Live weight, how it works is an animal needs a certain quantity of energy to maintain its live weight. The lighter that animal is, the less energy requirement to maintain that live weight. That's the principle behind it. Calving interval, you've longer period of time between lactations. Overall, what this index is going to achieve really is, well, it's going to favour cows that are more fertile. As I said, you have less replacements per one dairy cow. They'll be slightly lighter in terms of, they have a lower maintenance cost. And look, we also need to consider the context of beef coming from the dairy herd, and Alan Toon is going to be talking about that in subsequent slides. Future developments then. So there's quite a body of work being conducted in Teagasc at the moment around methane. Methane is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector in Ireland. So similar in the same research farm over in Gilbert, we had two cohorts of animals. We had high EBI cows called the elites, and we had another cohort called the national average, so national average EBI. Using the green feed technology, and you would have seen that outside the front of the Corrin Mart there today, the trailer there, we're able to measure methane for each individual animal over full grazing season, and this is really novel research. And what this research found is that across the full lactation, there was no significant difference in methane per day from the elites in comparison to the national average. And this is very interesting results, because if we use the methodology that's applied in our life cycle assessment models, which we use, as well as the methodologies that applied at a national level to calculate our national greenhouse gas emissions, what we found is that the elites would have a higher methane per day than that of a national average. And that's because, as I'll go back to it, they need higher energy requirement to achieve that increase in productivity. Another interesting finding then on top of that is that the difference between the calculated and measured, there's an 18% difference between the calculated and measured. So we're actually, the methane per day on animals at grass is lower than if we calculate it in the methodologies we have. Combining, I suppose, that the results that we find in terms of methane with milk production, what we're finding is the elite animals produced 8% greater kilos of milk solids than that of the national average, while also maintaining, as I said, the same quantity of methane. So overall, what the EBI is showing here is that you're actually creating a more efficient animal, both on a milk production basis but also a methane basis. You have less methane per kilo of milk solids. This result, it's only 1 year. It's only one grazing season over a relatively small number of animals. We need to do this over multiple years to discount any year effect that might occur, and over, I suppose, a wider range of animals as well, to build up a more direct measurements from dairy animals. So overall, in summary, what we have here is we're introducing the carbon subindex into the EBI. We're one of the first countries in the world that are actually going to be directly taking account of emissions in the index. It's focusing on total emissions, not emissions intensity or your carbon footprint. And as I said, the reason behind that is we have to start striving to try to achieve that 25% reduction in national greenhouse gas emissions. The carbon subindex itself is going to increase economic weight on traits that reduces emissions. So as I said, the likes of survivability, your calving interval, and it's going to reduce economic weight on traits that will increase emissions. So as I showed before, increased productivity around milk, fat and protein content, and your carcass weights. Overall, the carbon subindex is going to it'll be reflecting 10% of the overall index. And what it's going to achieve really is we're going to direct the agriculture sector towards to produce more efficient animals and more efficient farming systems. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer.